As we saw earlier, the web is continually evolving with new functionality when it comes to type. One of the major game changers is the ability to display a typeface on your site that someone does not already have installed on their computer. In the next few videos, we'll cover two mainstream models used to serve up web fonts on a site. The first model is on self-hosted web fonts, and the second is on using other web font hosted services. There are multiple avenues available today, so we'll focus on a few of the more popular ones in each model. Up first, let's talk about self-hosted web fonts. This means you have actual web font files hosted on your own site and are calling them through the @fontface method in your CSS. To serve up web fonts like this, you will need to purchase a web font license from a foundry or font distributor, or you've chosen a typeface with a free web font license to host the files and serve them up on your site. Make sure to read what the license covers for a typeface. In most cases, buying a standard desktop license does not cover web font use, so you'll need to buy a web font license. Let's head over to myfonts.com to see how. First, I'll click on the bestsellers list, and we can check out a bunch of different typefaces here, but I like Brain and Grotesque, so we'll click into that. And we're presented with the specimen images which showcase the typeface and its features, so designers can get an idea of how it looks in different settings. If we scroll down, we see there are multiple licensing options available, like desktop and web font. If you click into those icons, you'll get a more detailed statement on what each license covers. As mentioned earlier, if there's not a web font license available for a typeface, then contact the foundry or type designer to see how to proceed. It's worth noting here that you can try out these web fonts before you buy them, if you want to get a good understanding of if they're the right fit for your site. So let's say I'm sold on Brain and Grotesque and I want to get it. I'll click the Add to Cart, and here we're presented with the two different licensing options. We'd get a discount if we purchase both, but I only want the web, so I'll click that and hit Add to Cart. I'll continue to my cart, and on this page, we're presented with our page views per month. You should enter whatever page view your site is getting per month. So let's say we're getting 100,000 page views. We'll see here that our total actually increases. And this is because more people will be seeing the font on a site, so it requires a higher price for a license. If we finish the checkout, we'd get instructions from MyFonts on how to implement these web fonts for our site. The details may be slightly different on other font distributor sites like FontShop, WebType, or Fonts.com, but the gist is the same. The second scenario we discussed in regards to self-hosting web fonts dealt with utilizing a typeface with a free license for use on the web. So let's head over to fontsquirrel.com to check that out. Here we could browse different fonts to see which ones we would like, but I've already picked out one called Droid Serif, so we'll head over to that. If we click on that, we're again presented with a bunch of different specimen images showcasing the typeface. And if we hit Download TTF, then we could download the actual desktop license files for our computer and install them there, which is great if you want to use them for mock-ups or things like that in design apps. But what we want is the web font kit, so I'll click that. There are different language sets and file options available to choose from that will affect how large our web font files are. A single web font may be a small file size, but they can add up pretty fast with multiple weights and styles and language support. So be careful with how that affects page load times, and watch out for roughened typefaces as their file sizes can get really big really fast and their rendering on the web is a toss-up. Once we download the files, we can open up our folder and jump into the Droid Serif font face kit. We're presented with its license if you want to read that and how to use web fonts. We're going to be going over that, so we don't need to look at that, and we'll jump into the web fonts folder. Here we're presented with 4 different styles of the typeface. And in each of these folders, we have the different styles of this web font to use on our site. We don't need these specimen files or CSS files, as they're just showing off how the typeface can look. To expedite the process, I've set up an example workspace on Treehouse that you can launch and check out. I've already placed all those web font files in one folder for our web fonts folder. Now we can call them using the @fontface method in CSS. The CSS is based on the example CSS from the original folder that we got from FontSquirrel, so let's look at how it works. Here, we have the @fontface rule that calls the fonts onto the site. We have our font family, which is simply named Droid Serif, and then we have the source URLs for each format of the web fonts necessary for different browsers. These are different file versions of the same style that are linked to from the web fonts folder over here. Next, we have the font weight and style, and both are normal because this is our regular style. We'll want to start a new font face rule for our next style, which is our regular italic weight. So these files are linked to our italic weight style, and then we've changed the font style here to italic, and then we've gone on for our bold and set that up, and our bold italic and set those up. Now I've set up the body of our document to be that typeface droid serif with serif as a fallback font. I've also created some bold and italic classes that we can call in our HTML. The HTML is quite simple as it just references each of the typefaces that we're calling and uses the styles to display those typefaces. Let's go check that out. Looks great. Even though droid serif is not installed on this computer, we can still see it displayed on this web page. Our web fonts have been called, and all 4 styles are displaying correctly. As a quick reference, I'll show you what would appear if the @fontface method wasn't set up and if the files weren't installed on our computer. So I'll go back to our CSS and remove all these @fontface calls for our web fonts. And I'll resave the file and then refresh the file over here. Our droid serif typeface is gone and replaced with the basic serif rendered from the browser because we're no longer calling it in our CSS. There are both pros and cons to self-hosting web fonts. Some pros include owning a web font license versus subscribing to a web font for a limited time. The ability to custom subset fonts, which means removing unnecessary characters to minimize the file size. More control over the way fonts are served up. And being able to purchase the exact typeface we want instead of finding a close match from a subscription library that might not have the exact one. The main con of self-hosting is it can be more expensive upfront to purchase a web license rather than subscribe to a hosted service. For instance, the Brandon Grotesque family we used as a reference on my fonts was starting at $249 for web fonts. That same family is also available on Adobe Typekit, a subscription-based model starting at $25 per year. Now that you know more about self-hosting fonts, you can get some practice by downloading some web font kits and seeing how to implement them. You can also check out the example files to this project in the download section. Up next, we'll look at the web font hosting services available today.